The rain hammered against the windshield like 1,000 tiny fists, each drop exploding into a starburst of water that the wipers could barely keep up with. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles going white as I navigated the winding road that led to my childhood home. The leather of the wheel was cold and slightly damp from the humidity that had seeped into the car, and I could smell that particular scent of wet asphalt mixed with pine trees that always meant I was getting close to the old neighborhood. My stomach churned with a mixture of dread and curiosity, the kind of feeling you get when you know something important is about to happen, but you cannot quite prepare yourself for it. The call had come 3 days ago. Aunt Margaret was dead. The words had felt surreal coming through the phone, delivered in the flat, professional tone of someone from the law office of Henderson and Associates. I had not seen Aunt Margaret in almost 5 years, not since that terrible Christmas when she had accused my mother of stealing her silver candlesticks. The fight that followed had been spectacular, with voices raised so high that the neighbors 2 houses down had heard every word. My mother had stormed out, dragging me and my younger brother Danny with her, and we had never gone back. Now here I was, driving through a storm that seemed determined to wash away the road itself, heading back to the house where I had spent so many summers as a child. The lawyer had been insistent that I attend the reading of the will. He had said there were matters that required my immediate attention, matters that could not be discussed over the phone. His voice had carried a weight that made me cancel my plans and book the first flight out. The house appeared through the rain, like a ghost materializing from the mist. It was a large Victorian structure, painted a pale yellow that had faded over the years to something closer to cream. The wraparound porch sagged slightly on the left side, and several of the shutters hung at odd angles. The garden that Aunt Margaret had once tended with such fierce pride had grown wild, with roses climbing over everything in a tangle of thorns and fading blooms. I pulled into the gravel driveway, the tires crunching over the small stones, and turned off the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to the rain drum on the roof of the car and watching the water stream down the windows. The front door opened before I could even get out of the car. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by the warm glow of the interior lights. As I grabbed my bag and made a run for the porch, I recognized my cousin Sarah. She had changed since I last saw her. Her hair, once a vibrant auburn, was now streaked with gray, and she had lost weight, her face gaunt and tired-looking. She held the door open for me, and I stumbled inside, dripping water all over the hardwood floor of the entryway. The house smelled exactly as I remembered. There was a faint scent of lavender that Aunt Margaret had always loved, mixed with old wood and the musty smell of a house that had seen too many years. The wallpaper in the hallway was the same floral pattern I remembered from childhood, though it had yellowed with age and was peeling in several places. A grandfather clock stood against one wall, its pendulum swinging back and forth with a steady tick-tock that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet house. Sarah closed the door behind me, shutting out the sound of the rain. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and I could see she had been crying. Without a word, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. I hugged her back, feeling the sharpness of her shoulder blades through her thin sweater. She smelled like coffee and cigarettes, and when she pulled away, I could see her hands were shaking. "Welcome back," she said, her voice hoarse. "I did not think you would come." "I almost did not," I admitted, setting my bag down on the floor. The water from my coat was forming a small puddle on the wood. "How are you holding up?" She shrugged, a gesture that seemed to take all her energy. "I do not know. It still does not feel real." She was here one day, yelling at the mailman about putting the letters in the wrong box, and then the next morning I found her in her chair in the living room, just sitting there like she had fallen asleep. But she was cold. I reached out and squeezed her hand. "I am sorry, Sarah. I know you two were close." She nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "The lawyer is already here. Mr. Henderson. He is in the study with the others." "Others?" I asked, surprised. "Who else is here?" "Your mother," Sarah said, and I felt my stomach drop. "And Danny. And Uncle Robert flew in from Seattle this morning. And there are a few others. People I did not even know Aunt Margaret kept in touch with. My mother, of course she would be here, despite everything that had happened. Despite the years of silence and the bitter words that have been exchanged, she would not miss the reading of the will. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, the anxiety that always came when I thought about facing her. We had not spoken in over a year, not since I had told her I was moving across the country for a job. She had taken it as a personal betrayal, as if my entire life was supposed to revolve around staying close to her. Sarah led me down the hallway toward the study. The floorboards creaked under our feet, and I could hear voices coming from behind the closed door. One of them was definitely my mother. I would recognize that sharp, clipped tone anywhere. She was arguing with someone, her voice rising and falling in that particular rhythm that meant she was working herself up into a fury. I paused outside the door, my hand on the brass knob. It was cool under my palm, and I could feel my heart beating faster. Sarah gave me an encouraging nod, and I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The study was exactly as I remembered it. Dark with paneling covered the walls, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined three sides of the room. A massive oak desk dominated the space, and behind it sat a man I assumed was Mr. Henderson. He was older, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. He wore a dark suit that looked expensive, and he had the kind of calm, measured expression that lawyers seem to cultivate. My mother stood near the fireplace, her arms crossed over her chest. She had aged since I last saw her, new lines etched around her mouth and eyes. Her hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore a black dress that looked like she had bought it specifically for the occasion. When she saw me, her expression hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "So you decided to show up after all," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "How generous of you to grace us with your presence." I felt a familiar anger rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. "Not now. Not here." "Hello, Mom," I said evenly. "It is good to see you, too." My brother Danny was sitting in one of the leather armchairs near the window. He looked up when I entered and gave me a small smile. He had grown a beard since I last saw him, and it made him look older, more serious. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, and I could see mud on his boots. He must have driven straight from his construction job. Uncle Robert stood near the bookshelves, examining the spines of the books with apparent interest. He was my father's brother, a tall man with a perpetual tan, and the kind of easy smile that made people trust him instantly. He had always been my favorite uncle, the one who would slip me $20 when my parents were not looking and tell me stories about his adventures traveling the world. There were three other people in the room that I did not recognize. An elderly woman sat in the corner, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a floral dress and had her white hair styled in careful curls. Next to her was a middle-aged man in a rumpled suit, nervously tapping his foot against the floor. And standing near the door was a younger woman, probably in her late 20s, with dark hair and an expression of barely concealed excitement. Mr. Henderson stood up as I entered, extending his hand across the desk. "You must be Jessica," he said. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Please have a seat. I believe we are all here now." I shook his hand and found a spot on the small sofa next to Danny. He reached over and squeezed my shoulder, and I felt some of the tension leave my body. At least I had one ally in the room. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and opened a leather folder on his desk. Inside, I could see several documents, all neatly organized. He pulled out a pair of reading glasses and put them on, then looked around the room at each of us in turn. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I know this is a difficult time, and I appreciate your patience. I am here today to read the last will and testament of Margaret Elizabeth Thornton, who passed away 6 days ago. Before we begin, I want to make it clear that what I am about to read represents Miss Thornton's final wishes, as expressed in a document that was updated just 3 months ago. 3 months ago? My mother's voice cut through the room like a knife. She changed her will 3 months ago? Why was I not informed? Mr. Henderson looked at her calmly. Miss Thornton was under no obligation to inform anyone of changes to her will, Mrs. Thornton. She was of sound mind and body when she made these changes, and they were witnessed and notarized according to all legal requirements. My mother's face flushed red, but she said nothing more. I could see her jaw working, grinding her teeth the way she always did when she was angry. Mr. Henderson began to read. I, Margaret Elizabeth Thornton, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. I hereby revoke all previous wills and codicils. He paused, looking up at us over his glasses. The room was silent, except for the ticking of a clock somewhere and the distant sound of rain against the windows. To my niece, Sarah Mitchell, who has been my companion and caretaker for the past 10 years, I leave the sum of $50,000 and all of my jewelry, with the exception of my mother's diamond ring, which I will address separately. Sarah let out a small gasp. I turned to look at her and saw tears streaming down her face. $50,000 was more money than she had probably ever seen in her life. She worked as a waitress at the diner in town, barely making ends meet while taking care of Aunt Margaret. To my nephew, Robert Thornton, I leave my collection of first edition books and the sum of $25,000 in appreciation for the kindness he has always shown me. Uncle Robert nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. To my great-nephew, Daniel Thornton, I leave the sum of $15,000 in my grandfather's pocket watch, which I know he has always admired. Danny's eyes widened. He had loved that pocket watch as a kid, always asking Aunt Margaret if he could hold it and watch the gears turn inside. Mr. Henderson continued reading through a list of smaller bequests. The elderly woman in the corner was apparently Aunt Margaret's former housekeeper, and she received $10,000 and some household items. The nervous man was a distant cousin I had never heard of, and he received $5,000. The young woman was the daughter of one of Aunt Margaret's old friends, and she received some paintings that had hung in the upstairs hallway. Then Mr. Henderson paused. He looked directly at me, and I felt my heart start to race. To my great-niece, Jessica Thornton, I leave my mother's diamond ring, the contents of the safe deposit box at First National Bank, and the house at 42 Maple Street, along with all its contents not otherwise specified in this will. The room erupted. My mother's voice rose above everyone else's, shrill and furious. What? That is impossible. This house should come to me. I am her sister-in-law. I have been part of this family for over 30 years. Mr. Henderson held up his hand, calling for quiet. Please, everyone. There is more. My mother was not finished. She turned on me, her face twisted with rage. You did this. You manipulated her somehow, turned her against her own family. I did not do anything, I said, my voice shaking. I have not even spoken to Aunt Margaret in 5 years. You know that. Exactly. My mother spat. 5 years. And suddenly she leaves you everything? It does not make sense. Mrs. Thornton, Mr. Henderson said firmly, if you cannot control yourself, I will have to ask you to leave. This is a legal proceeding, and I will not tolerate disruptions. My mother glared at him but fell silent, her chest heaving with barely controlled fury. Mr. Henderson turned back to his papers. As I was saying, there is more. Miss Thornton left a letter to be read aloud at this time. With your permission, I will read it now. He pulled out an envelope from a folder. It was cream-colored and sealed with red wax. He broke the seal carefully and unfolded the letter inside. The paper looked old, and I could see Aunt Margaret's distinctive handwriting covering both sides. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and began to read in a steady, measured voice. My dear family, if you are hearing this, then I have passed on, and you are all gathered in my study, probably wondering why I have made the choices I have made. I want you to know that every decision in this was made with careful thought and for specific reasons. To Sarah, my dear girl, you have been more than a niece to me. You have been a daughter, a friend, and a constant source of comfort in my final years. When everyone else was too busy with their own lives, you were here, making sure I took my medicine, cooking my meals, and listening to my stories even when you had heard them 100 times before. The money I leave you is not payment. It is a gift, freely given, so that you might finally have the chance to pursue your own dreams instead of spending all your time taking care of an old woman. To Robert, you have always been a gentleman and a scholar. I know you will treasure the books as I have, and I hope they bring you as much joy as they brought me. To Daniel, you remind me so much of your grandfather. You have his hands, strong and capable, and his kind heart. Take care of that watch. It has been in our family for 4 generations, and I trust you to pass it on to your own children someday. And now to Jessica. My dear, sweet Jessica, I know you must be confused right now. We have not spoken in so long, and I am sure you are wondering why I would leave you my most precious possessions. The truth is, you remind me of myself when I was young. You have courage and independence, and you are not afraid to stand up for what you believe in, even when it costs you. But there's another reason, a reason that I have kept secret for many, many years. Jessica, in the safe deposit box at First National Bank, you will find documents that will explain everything. I am sorry that I cannot tell you in person. I am sorry for many things. But I trust you to do what is right with what you find there. To the rest of my family, I ask for your understanding and your forgiveness. The choices I have made were not made lightly, and they were not made to hurt anyone. They were made because sometimes the truth must come out, no matter how painful it might be. With all my love, Margaret Elizabeth Thornton. The room was silent when Mr. Henderson finished reading. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, but I could not move. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. What documents? What truth? My mother broke the silence. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice had lost some of its earlier fury. It sounded hollow now, almost frightened. "What is she talking about? What documents?" Mr. Henderson folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "I am afraid I cannot answer that, Mrs. Thornton." Miss Thornton did not share the contents of the safe deposit box with me. She simply instructed me to ensure that Jessica received the key and the necessary paperwork to access it. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small manila envelope. He slid it across the desk toward me. "This is the key and the authorization letter. The box is at the First National Bank on Main Street. They are expecting you." I reached out and took the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavier than I expected, and I could feel the shape of the key inside. What could possibly be in that box? What secret had Aunt Margaret been keeping all these years? Uncle Robert stepped forward, his expression serious. "Jessica, whatever is in that box, you do not have to face it alone. If you want someone to go with you to the bank, I will come." I looked up at him, grateful for the offer. "Thank you, Uncle Robert. I think I would like that." My mother made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Of course," she said bitterly. "Of course you all rally around her. Poor Jessica, who gets everything while the rest of us get scraps. Mom, Danny said quietly that is not fair." "Fair?" My mother whirled on him. "You want to talk about fair? I spent years taking care of Margaret when she was sick. I brought her meals. I drove her to doctor's appointments. I listened to her complain about every little thing. And what do I get? Nothing. Not a single mention in her will." "That is not entirely true," Mr. Henderson interjected. He pulled out another document. "Miss Thornton did leave you something, Mrs. Thornton." I was getting to that. My mother froze. "What?" "She left you a letter, a private letter, to be given to you after the reading of the will." He held out a sealed envelope, similar to the one that had contained the letter he had just read. My mother snatched it from his hand and tore it open. Her eyes scanned the page, and I watched as her face went through a series of expressions. Shock, disbelief, anger, and finally something that looked almost like fear. Her hands began to shake, and the letter fluttered to the floor. "No," she whispered. No, she would not. She promised. "Mom?" I stood up, concerned despite everything. "What does it say?" She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "You need to stay away from that safe deposit box," she said, her voice urgent. "Whatever is in there, Jessica, you do not want to know. Trust me." The room had gone very quiet. Everyone was staring at my mother, who looked like she might collapse at any moment. Sarah moved to her side, guiding her to a chair. My mother sank into it, her face pale and her breathing rapid. "Mrs. Thornton," Mr. Henderson said gently, "is there something you need to tell us?" My mother shook her head violently. No. This is between me and Margaret. It has always been between us." She looked up at me again, and I saw tears in her eyes. "Please, Jessica, please do not open that box. Some secrets are meant to stay buried." But I could see in her eyes that she knew it was too late. Whatever secret Aunt Margaret had been keeping, whatever truth she had hidden away in that safe deposit box, it was about to come out, and from the look on my mother's face, it was going to change everything. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. If there is nothing else, I believe we are finished here. Miss Thornton, he looked at me. You are now the legal owner of this property. I have all the necessary paperwork for you to sign. We can do that now. Or, if you prefer, you can come by my office tomorrow. Tomorrow, I said. I need some time to process all of this. He nodded understandingly. Of course. My office hours are from 9 to 5. Just call ahead, and my secretary will make sure I am available. People began to file out of the study. The elderly housekeeper dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. The nervous cousin hurried out as if he could not wait to leave. The young woman paused to shake my hand and congratulate me, though her smile did not quite reach her eyes. Uncle Robert squeezed my shoulder. I meant what I said. When you are ready to go to the bank, call me, day or night. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. Danny hugged me before he left. This is crazy, he whispered in my ear, but I am glad you are here. Someone needs to figure out what is going on. Sarah lingered after everyone else had gone. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, and her shoulders slumped. Do you want me to make up your old room? She asked. You are staying, are you not? I nodded. Yes, I will stay, at least for a few days, until I figure out what to do with all of this. She managed a weak smile. I will put fresh sheets on the bed, and I will make some dinner. I do not think any of us have eaten today. That sounds good, I said. Thank you, Sarah. She left, and I was alone in the study with Mr. Henderson. He was packing up his papers, organizing them back into his leather folder with practiced efficiency. Mr. Henderson, I said, and he looked up. Did Aunt Margaret give you any indication of what is in that safe deposit box? He paused, considering his words carefully. She did not tell me specifically, no, but I can tell you that she was very insistent that you, and only you, should have access to it. She came to my office 3 months ago, as I mentioned, to update her will. She seemed troubled, but also determined. She said that she had carried a burden for too long, and it was time to set things right. Set things right, I repeated. What does that mean? I am afraid I do not know, he said. But Miss Thornton was a woman of great integrity. Whatever she has left for you, I am certain she believed it was important. After he left, I stood alone in the study, looking around at the books and the furniture and the portrait of my great-grandparents that hung over the fireplace. The house was quiet now, just the sound of the rain outside and the occasional creak of old wood settling. I walked over to the desk and ran my hand over the smooth surface. How many times had I seen Aunt Margaret sitting here, writing letters or paying bills or reading one of her beloved books? I pulled the manila envelope from my pocket and opened it. Inside was a small brass key and a letter on official bank stationery, authorizing me to access safe deposit box number 217. The key was cold in my palm, and I closed my fingers around it, feeling its weight. What are you hiding, Aunt Margaret? I whispered to the empty room. What secret was so important that you kept it for all these years? The house offered no answers, just a steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the whisper of rain against the windows. That night, I lay in my old bedroom, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of the house. Sarah had made up the bed with fresh lavender-scented sheets, and the room looked much as it had when I was a teenager. The same floral wallpaper, the same white dresser with the oval mirror, the same window seat where I used to sit and read for hours. But I could not sleep. My mind kept going over everything that had happened. The will, the letter, my mother's reaction. What could possibly be in that safe deposit box that would make my mother so afraid? She had always been a strong woman, sometimes too strong, always certain of herself and her opinions. But today, I had seen her genuinely frightened, and that scared me more than anything else. I got up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, and the moon was trying to break through the clouds. I could see the garden below, wild and overgrown, the roses climbing over the old arbor where Aunt Margaret used to sit on summer evenings. Beyond the garden was the old oak tree where Danny and I used to build forts, and past that, the woods that stretched for miles. A soft knock on the door made me turn. "Come in," I called quietly. Sarah entered, carrying 2 mugs of tea. She was wearing an old bathrobe and slippers, her hair loosed around her shoulders. "I thought you might not be able to sleep," she said, handing me one of the mugs. I took it gratefully, wrapping my hands around the warm ceramic. "Thank you. You are right. I cannot stop thinking about everything." She sat down on the edge of the bed, cradling her own mug. "Jessica, there is something I need to tell you. Something about your Aunt Margaret." I sat down next to her, my heart beginning to race again. "What is it?" Sarah took a sip of her tea, as if gathering courage. "About 6 months ago, she started acting strange. She would spend hours in the attic, going through old boxes and papers. Sometimes I would hear her crying up there. When I asked her what was wrong, she would just say she was setting things right. Setting things right, I repeated. That is what Mr. Henderson said she told him. Sarah nodded. One night, about a month before she died, I found her in the study. She was burning papers in the fireplace. Lots of them. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was destroying evidence of her cowardice. Those were her exact words. Evidence of her cowardice. What do you think she meant? Sarah shook her head. I do not know, but she also said something else. She said that you deserved to know the truth, that you were the only one strong enough to handle it. She said your mother had made her promise to keep the secret, but she could not take it to her grave. It was eating her alive. I felt a chill run down my spine. What secret, Sarah? Do you have any idea what she was talking about? Sarah looked at me with sad eyes. I think it has something to do with your father. My father? I set down my tea, my hand suddenly shaking. My father died when I was 3 years old. I barely remember him. Car accident, right? That is what we were all told. Sarah said carefully. But a few weeks ago, I overheard your mother and Aunt Margaret on the phone. They were arguing. Your mother was screaming at her, telling her she had no right to interfere, that what happened was in the past and should stay there. And Aunt Margaret said that lies have a way of destroying families, and she would not be part of it anymore. I stood up and walked back to the window, my mind reeling. Are you saying my father did not die in a car accident? I am saying I do not know what happened, Sarah said gently. But I think whatever is in that safe deposit box will tell you the truth. And I think your mother is terrified of what you will find. We sat in silence for a while, drinking our tea and listening to the old house settle around us. Finally, Sarah stood up and gave me a hug. Try to get some sleep, she said. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. After she left, I lay back down on the bed, but sleep was even more impossible now. My father. Could this really be about my father? I had so few memories of him. A deep laugh, strong arms lifting me up, the smell of his cologne. And then he was gone, and my mother never wanted to talk about him. Whenever I asked questions as a child, she would get that tight look on her face and change the subject. I must have eventually fallen asleep, because I woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of birds singing in the garden. For a moment, I forgot where I was, and then it all came rushing back. The will, the safe deposit box, Sarah's revelation about my father. I got dressed quickly and went downstairs. Sarah was in the kitchen making breakfast. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air, and my stomach growled. I realized I had barely eaten anything the day before. Good morning, Sarah said, looking up from the stove. How did you sleep? Not great, I admitted, but better than I expected. She poured me a cup of coffee and slid a plate of eggs and bacon across the counter. Eat something. You will need your strength today. I was halfway through breakfast when my phone rang. It was Uncle Robert. Good morning, Jessica, he said. I wanted to check in and see if you had decided when you want to go to the bank. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost 9. How about this morning? I said, I do not think I can wait any longer. I will pick you up in 30 minutes, he said. True to his word, Uncle Robert pulled up in front of the house exactly 30 minutes later. He was driving a rental car, a nondescript sedan that looked out of place next to the old Victorian house. I grabbed my jacket and the manila envelope and headed out. The drive to the bank was quiet. Uncle Robert seemed to sense that I did not want to make small talk, and I was grateful for that. My mind was too full of questions and fears to engage in casual conversation. First National Bank was a solid brick building in the center of town, the kind of bank that had been there for generations and would probably be there for generations more. We parked in the lot and walked inside. The interior was all dark wood and marble, with high ceilings and a hushed atmosphere that made you want to whisper. I approached the front desk and showed the authorization letter to the woman sitting there. She was middle-aged, with carefully styled hair and a professional smile. She looked at the letter, then at me, and her expression changed slightly. "Ah, yes," she said. "We have been expecting you, Miss Thornton. Please follow me." She led us through a door and down a hallway to a room lined with safe deposit boxes. She used her key and my key together to open box number 217, then pulled out a long metal box and set it on the table in the center of the room. "Take all the time you need," she said, and left, closing the door behind her. I stood there, staring at the box. It was larger than I had expected, about 2 feet long and 6 inches deep. Uncle Robert put his hand on my shoulder. "Do you want me to stay, or would you rather do this alone?" he asked. "Stay," I said. "Please." He nodded and pulled out a chair for me. I sat down and took a deep breath, then lifted the lid of the box. Inside were several items. On top was a thick manila folder, bulging with papers. Beneath that was a smaller box, the kind that might hold jewelry. And at the bottom was a photograph album, old and worn. I picked up the folder first and opened it. Inside were legal documents, birth certificates, marriage certificates, newspaper clippings. I started reading, and with each page, I felt my understanding of my entire life shifting. The first document was a birth certificate, my birth certificate, but something was wrong. The name of the father was not the name I had always known. Instead of James Thornton, it said Michael Brennan. I looked up at Uncle Robert, confused. Who is Michael Brennan? His face had gone pale. He was staring at the document in my hands. "Michael Brennan was your Aunt Margaret's husband," he said, quietly. "He died about 30 years ago. Cancer. But that does not make sense," I said. "Why would his name be on my birth certificate?" Uncle Robert sat down heavily in the chair next to me. "Oh, God," he said. "Margaret, what did you do?" I kept reading. There was another birth certificate, this one for a baby girl born 28 years ago. The mother's name was Margaret Elizabeth Thornton. The father's name was Michael Brennan. The baby's name was Jessica Marie Brennan. My hand started shaking so badly that I almost dropped the papers. "This is me," I whispered. "This is my birth certificate. My real birth certificate." Uncle Robert reached over and took the papers from me, reading them himself. His face was ashen. "Jessica, I think you need to prepare yourself. I think Margaret was your mother, your biological mother." The room seemed to spin. "No," I said. "No, that is impossible. My mother is my mother. She raised me. She adopted you," Uncle Robert said gently, pointing to another document in the folder. "Look, here is the adoption paperwork. Margaret gave you to her sister-in-law to raise. You were only a few weeks old." I felt like I could not breathe. Why would she do that? Uncle Robert kept reading through the papers, and I saw his expression change from shock to understanding to sadness. According to this, he said, Michael was dying. He had terminal cancer. Margaret was devastated. And when she found out she was pregnant, she did not know what to do. She was 42 years old. Her husband was dying, and she had no idea how she would raise a child alone. Your mother, the woman you know as your mother, had just had a miscarriage. She desperately wanted a child. So they made an arrangement. An arrangement, I repeated numbly. They arranged to lie to me my entire life. There is more, Uncle Robert said, pulling out a letter from the folder. This is addressed to you. It is in Margaret's handwriting. I took the letter with trembling hands and began to read. My dearest Jessica, if you are reading this, then you know the truth. You know that I am your mother, your biological mother, and that the woman you have called Mom your entire life is actually your aunt. I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not expect you to understand. But I want you to know why I made the choice I did. When I found out I was pregnant with you, Michael was in the final stages of cancer. He had maybe 6 months to live. I was 42 years old, working as a librarian, with no family nearby to help me. I was terrified. How could I raise a child alone? How could I give you the life you deserved? Your aunt, the woman you know as your mother, had just lost a baby. She was heartbroken. She and James wanted a child so desperately. When I told her I was pregnant, she begged me to let her raise you. She said she would give you everything, a stable home, 2 parents, a normal life. She said it would be better for everyone. And I was weak. I was so weak, Jessica. I agreed. I told myself I was doing it for you, that you would have a better life with them. But the truth is, I was scared. I was scared of being alone, scared of failing you, scared of everything. Michael died 2 weeks after you were born. He got to hold you once, in the hospital. He said you were the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. And then he was gone. I gave you to your aunt when you were 3 weeks old. It was the hardest thing I have ever done. I held you one last time, memorized your face, and then I handed you over. Your aunt promised that I could still be part of your life, that I could be Aunt Margaret, that I could watch you grow up. And I was there for your birthdays, your holidays, your school plays. But it was never enough. Every time I saw you, I want to tell you the truth. Every time you called me Aunt Margaret, it broke my heart a little more. Your aunt made me promise never to tell you. She said it would only confuse you, that it would hurt you to know the truth. And for years, I kept that promise. I told myself she was right, that it was better for you not to know. But as I got older, as I faced my own mortality, I realized that I could not take this secret to my grave. You deserve to know where you came from. You deserve to know that you were loved, that you were wanted, even if I was too weak to keep you. I am sorry, Jessica. I am so sorry. I hope someday you can forgive me. I hope you can understand that everything I did because I thought it was best for you, even though I was wrong. You are strong, Jessica, stronger than I ever was. You have your father's courage and his kind heart, and you have my stubbornness and my love of books. You are the best parts of both of us. In this box, you will find photographs of your father and me. You will find letters he wrote to me, and letters I wrote to you but never sent. You will find your father's wedding ring, which I want you to have. I know this changes everything. I know you must be angry and confused and hurt, but please know that I loved you. I have always loved you. You were the greatest gift of my life, even if I was too much of a coward to claim you as my own. With all my love, your mother, Margaret. I finished reading the letter and sat there in silence, tears streaming down my face. Uncle Robert put his arm around me, and I leaned into him, sobbing. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, about who I was, had been a lie. After a while, I pulled away and wiped my eyes. I picked up the photograph album and opened it. Inside were pictures I had never seen before. Margaret and a handsome man with dark hair and kind eyes. Their wedding day. Margaret pregnant, glowing with happiness despite the sadness in her eyes. The man, Michael, my father, holding a tiny baby. Me. There were dozens of photos. Chronicle of life I never knew I had. My first smile, my first tooth, my first steps, all documented by a mother who had given me away but never stopped loving me. At the bottom of the box was a small velvet pouch. I opened it and found a simple gold wedding band. Inside was an inscription, M&M forever, Michael and Margaret. I slipped the ring onto my thumb. It fit perfectly. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. What are you going to do? I do not know, I said honestly. I need to talk to my mother, my aunt, whoever she is. She is still your mother. Uncle Robert said gently. She raised you. She loved you. That does not change just because you were not born to her. But she lied to me, I said, anger flaring up. My whole life, she lied to me. She did, he agreed, and that was wrong. But I think she did it because she loved you. She was afraid of losing you. I stood up and started packing everything back into the box. I need to go, I said. I need to talk to her. The drive back to the house was a blur. Uncle Robert tried to talk to me, But I could not focus on his words. My mind was spinning with everything I had learned. Margaret was my mother. The woman I had called Mom my entire life was actually my aunt. My father had died when I was 2 weeks old, not 3 years old. Everything was a lie. When we pulled up to the house, I saw my mother's car in the driveway. She was sitting on the porch, waiting. When she saw me get out of the car, she stood up, her face pale and drawn. I walked up to her, carrying the metal box. She looked at it and then at me, and I saw fear and resignation in her eyes. You know, she said, it was not a question. I know, I said. She sank back down onto the porch steps, and I sat down next to her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she broke the silence. I am sorry, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I am so sorry, Jessica. I never wanted you to find out like this. How did you want to find out? I asked, or were you planning to take this secret to your grave too? She flinched. I do not know. I told myself that it was better if you never knew, that it would only hurt you. It was not your decision to make, I said. I had a right to know who I am, where I came from. You are my daughter, she said fiercely, turning to look at me. I do not care what any piece of paper says. I raised you. I was there for your first word, your first day of school, your first heartbreak. I am your mother. And Margaret? I asked. What was she? My mother's face crumpled. She was your mother too. She gave birth to you. But she could not keep you. She was falling apart, Jessica. Michael was dying, and she was barely holding it together. She asked me to take you, to give you a stable home. And I wanted you so badly. I had just lost a baby, and I thought I would never have a child of my own. You were a gift you lied about, I said. Yes, she admitted. Elite. We both did. Margaret and I agreed that it would be easier for everyone if you just thought of her as your aunt. We thought it would be less confusing for you. Less confusing for me, or less threatening for you. I asked, were you afraid that if I knew the truth, I would love her more than you? She did not answer, but I could see the truth in her eyes. That was exactly what she had been afraid of. I stood up. I need some time, I said. I need to process all of this. Jessica, please. She reached my hand, but I pulled away. Not now, Mom. I cannot do this right now. I went inside, leaving her sitting on the porch. Sarah was in the kitchen, and she took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. I cried on her shoulder, letting out all the pain and anger and confusion that had been building up inside me. That night, I sat in Margaret's study, surrounded by her books and her things. I read through all the letters she had written to me, but never sent. Letters about my first birthday, my first day of kindergarten, my high school graduation. She had documented my entire life from the sidelines, loving me from a distance. I thought about all the time she had been there for me. The summer I spent with her when I was 12, reading books and helping in the garden. The way she had always listened to me, really listened, when I talked about my dreams and fears. The way she had stood up for me when my mother and I fought about my decision to move across the country. She had been my mother all along. I just had not known it. Over the next few days, I slowly began to piece together my new reality. I talked to Uncle Robert, who filled in more details about Michael and Margaret's relationship. I talked to Sarah, who told me stories about Margaret's final months, how she had agonized over the decision to tell me the truth. And eventually, I talked to my mother again. We sat in the study, the same room where the will had been read, and we had the most honest conversation we had ever had. She told me about the miscarriage, about the depression that had followed, about how desperate she had been for a child. She told me about the day Margaret had handed me to her, how she had promised to love me and protect me always. I am not saying what we did was right, she said, but I want you to understand why we did it. We thought we were protecting you. You were protecting yourselves, I said, but I could hear the softness in my own voice. The anger was still there, but it was fading, replaced by something more complex. Understanding, maybe, or at least the beginning of it. Yes, she admitted. We were protecting ourselves too. We were scared and selfish and human. And I am sorry. I am so sorry that you had to find out this way. I wish Margaret had told me herself, I said. I wish I had had the chance to talk to her about it. She wanted to, my mother said. She called me a few months ago and told me she was going to tell you. We had a terrible fight. I said things I regret now. I told her she had no right, that she had given up that right when she gave you to me. But she said she could not live with a lie anymore. She said you deserved the truth. We sat in silence for a while, and then my mother reached over and took my hand. I know I have no right to ask this, but I hope someday you can forgive me. You are my daughter, Jessica. You will always be my daughter. But I understand if you need time. I do need time, I said, but I am not going anywhere. We will figure this out. And slowly we did. It was not easy. There were more tears, more arguments, more painful conversations. But gradually, we began to rebuild our relationship on a foundation of truth instead of lies. I decided to keep the house. It felt right, somehow, to live in the place where Margaret had lived, to be surrounded by her books and her memories. Sarah stayed with me, and we became more like sisters and cousins. Danny visited often, and Uncle Robert came by whenever he was in town. I planted new roses in the garden, next to the wild ones that Margaret had loved. I sat in her chair in the study and read her books. I wore Michael's wedding ring on a chain around my neck, close to my heart, and sometimes, late at night, I would take out the letters Margaret had written to me and read them again. I would look at the photographs of her and Michael, young and in love, and I would try to imagine what my life might have been like if she had kept me. But then I would think about the life I did have, the mother who raised me, flawed and human, but loving in her own way, the brother who had always been there for me, the memories of birthday parties and family dinners and lazy summer afternoons. Margaret had been right about one thing. I was strong enough to handle the truth. It had shaken me, changed me, forced me to re-examine everything I thought I knew about myself and my family. But it had not broken me. If anything, it had made me stronger, because now I knew the whole story. I knew where I came from, who I was, and most importantly, I knew that I had been loved by Margaret, who had given me life, by my mother, who had raised me, by my father, who had held me once and called me beautiful. I was a product of love and loss, of difficult choices and human weakness. I was Jessica Thornton, daughter of Margaret and Michael, raised by a woman who wanted me so desperately that she had been willing to live a lie to keep me. And I was home. Finally, truly home. The house on Maple Street was no longer just Aunt Margaret's house. It was my house now, filled with the ghosts of the past and the promise of the future. And as I sat in the study, watching the sun set through the window, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Some secrets, when they finally come to light, destroy everything they touch. But others, like this one, have the power to heal, to bring understanding where there was only confusion, to replace lies with truth and fear with love. Margaret had given me two gifts. The first was life itself. The second was the truth. And in the end, that was the greatest gift of all.